The old lighthouse keeper, Silas, swore the foghorn had a voice. Not a booming nautical bellow, but a whisper, a sigh that carried across the churning grey sea. It started subtly, a low moan beneath the foghorn's usual blasts. Silas, a man weathered like driftwood, dismissed it at first. Seasickness, he'd muttered, or maybe just too much of his wife's potent elderflower wine. But the whisper grew. It began to weave itself into the foghorn's rhythm, a mournful counterpoint to the blasts that echoed across the lonely isle. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It felt like a presence, something in the fog, watching him. One night, the fog rolled in thicker than usual, a suffocating blanket that swallowed the light from the lamp room. The whisper was louder, clearer. Silas, his heart hammering against his ribs, strained to hear it. It seemed to be calling a name. Ilara. Ilara was his wife. She'd vanished 10 years ago, swallowed by the sea during a storm much like this one. Her body was never found. Silas had carried the guilt of her loss like a stone in his gut, a constant ache that never truly subsided. Now, this whisper, her name, carried on the wind. It chilled him to the bone. He stumbled out onto the lantern room's balcony, the wind whipping his hair around his face. The fog swirled around him, thick and white. And he could have sworn he saw a figure moving within it, a woman with long, dark hair. "Ilara!" he croaked, his voice barely audible above the wind and the mournful wail of the foghorn. The figure didn't answer, but the whisper grew louder, closer. "Ilara? Silas?" He reached out, his hand trembling, trying to grasp the apparition. His fingers brushed against something cold, something slick. He recoiled, his heart leaping into his throat. When he looked again, the figure was gone. Only the swirling fog remained. But something was different. Hanging from the railing, clinging to it like seaweed, was a single waterlogged seashell. It was a type he hadn't seen in years, a rare, iridescent shell Ilara had collected. Silas picked it up, turning it over in his trembling hands. As he did, he noticed something carved into its surface, barely visible. It was a date, the date of Ilara's disappearance. Suddenly the foghorn let out a blast, a deafening roar that shook the entire lighthouse. But it wasn't the usual sound. This blast was different, distorted, as if the foghorn itself was screaming. And within the scream, Silas heard it again, the whisper clearer than ever before. "Help me, Silas." He looked out at the sea, the fog now swirling violently. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the core, that Ilara wasn't lost. She was trapped. Trapped in the fog, somehow bound to the sea, her voice echoing in the mournful wail of the foghorn. Silas knew what he had to do. He had to find her, even if it meant venturing into the heart of the storm, into the heart of the fog itself. He had to answer her call, even if it meant facing the horrors that lurked within the swirling white abyss. He grabbed his oilskins, his lantern, and stepped out into the storm, the mournful cry of the foghorn his only guide. He didn't know what he would find in the fog, but he knew he wouldn't rest until he found Ilara, or until the sea claimed him too. The foghorn wailed, a lonely, haunting sound that echoed across the empty sea, a constant reminder of the secrets it held and the woman lost within its embrace.